Sydney is a city of choices, high tech or Victorian, mountains or beautiful beaches. It is all up to you. And when it comes to deciding where to stay in Sydney, there are a lot of options, and picking the right option can make your trip all that much better. So, what we're going to be doing today is going over where you might want to stay in Sydney. I'm going to recommend some of the areas that a lot of tourists have grown to love, tell you what they love about those areas, and leave the choice up to you because everybody has their own decision to make when it comes to where to stay in Sydney. There's no perfect area for everyone, but there is probably a perfect area for you. So let's talk about the first and most likely place you're going to look at first in Sydney. And this would be the Rocks. The Rocks is the oldest area of Sydney, and as such, you're going to find a lot of historical places here. Historical hotels, historical houses, and beautiful views of the harbor are all plenty in this area. The Rocks is also a place where a lot of Sydney events are hosted for locals. You've got Christmas in July and Christmas in December. You've got Halloween and you've got Vivid Sydney. There are a ton of opportunities here to see some beautiful local events that take place in Sydney. And if you're here on a weekend that doesn't tend to have one of those events, you do have a local market that opens up most weekends. The Rocks is a beautiful area of Sydney, an area that always has something happening during the weekends, and a perfect area for most tourists who don't mind the high price tag of the hotels in exchange for the locale and being close to so many things that cater towards tourists. And right next to the Rocks, you have the other popular tourist destination of Sydney. This would be Circular Quay. Circular Quay is home to the Opera House. You're also right next to the Botanical Garden. It's on the other side of the Opera House, and this is where cruise ships dock. If you're taking a cruise and want to get right on the cruise, this might be a good place to stay, but do note Circular Quay is really expensive. It has some of the best views of Sydney that you could ask for, and that means you will also have to pay the price for them. However, if you still want to be next to the water and in a less touristic part of Sydney, there's always Darling Harbour. Darling Harbour still does cater to tourists, but it's a little bit more local. Around the harbor on three sides, you have pedestrian walkways lined with luxurious restaurants. You won't find a deal here, but you will find some amazing food. One of my favorite restaurants here is actually Anason, a Turkish restaurant. If you get a chance, I definitely recommend it. Darling Harbour overall is very central to the city. You are only a few blocks from the city business district, the CBD. We will talk about that later. Along with being very close to the CBD, Darling Harbour is also adjacent to Darling Quarter, which has a huge green space where a lot of events like South by Southwest are held. Additionally, if you have kids in between Darling Harbour and Darling Quarter, there's a really great playground. Darling Harbour is a great place to stay if you want to experience Sydney a bit more like a local, but you still want to be near an iconic area. Next up, we're going to be talking about the CBD. This would be the area that includes the Queen Victoria Building, a town hall, and a whole host of other amazing malls and restaurants to check out. This is my favorite area of the city. Personally, the hotel that I usually do find myself staying in here is the Hilton. This area of the city is a beautiful area of the city. You have some old style Victorian architecture along with a fusion of very high tech and Asian leaning areas. You have full malls that are dedicated to Japanese culture, Japanese arcades that have literally brought almost every machine over from Japan. It's a great place to take your kids, by the way. You're also right next door to Hyde Park, which is a beautiful section of Sydney that I recommend everybody check out. On the other side, away from Hyde Park, you have Darling Harbour, and cutting through the CBD, you have George Street. George Street becomes a pedestrian street in the CBD, and you can take it all the way down to Circular Quay and Darling Harbour. It's a beautiful street. I recommend walking at least once if you're in Sydney. And the specific area in the CBD, right next to Town Hall and the Queen Victoria Building, is my personal favorite stretch of street anywhere in the city. If you like the city, if you like that high tech feeling, that Asian feeling that a city gives you or city can give you, the Sydney CBD is probably for you. If you like what I just described, but the price tag is a little too high for you, you can go more towards Central Station. You're going to be extremely close to CBD, farther from everything else, but you're right near a central station where trains and the light rail go. It's very easy to go here to anywhere in the city. In addition, this is where you're going to find some cheaper restaurants and some cheaper places to stay. The food here is still going to be leaning more towards Asian than European, And there's going to be a lot more Thai food than you'll find anywhere else in the city. There's a specific block here that's called Thai Town, which should go a long ways to explaining why you're going to find a lot of Thai food here. As far as touristic places to see, there isn't much here unless you're going to Sydney to look at colleges. In my opinion, this is a great area to stay, but it's not an area that you're going to find a lot of things to take pictures of. You've got to walk down to the CBD and then continue walking towards Circular Quay, Darling Harbour, or Hyde Park. If you're looking for a cheap place to stay that's still close to the city, this is probably the best area for you. If the prices still do seem a little too high here, you can also check out King's Cross. King's Cross, I wouldn't specifically recommend because it's an area in transition right now. Being close to the east, King's Cross is a great way to stay somewhere close to Bondi but not too far from the city. It used to be the party district, the nightlife capital of Sydney. Those days have long gone. You're going to find some remnants of a once thriving nightlife, but unless you're some sort of nightlife archaeologist, there isn't much to be gained here. It's a beautiful area of the city. It has some really cool things and some amazing history, but King's Cross isn't what it used to be. It's a great place if you're looking for a few remaining hostels that might be offering cheap stays, but other than that, there's not much going on here. There is a train station, so you can get throughout the city, and it's one of the closer areas to Bondi that isn't specifically Bondi. Adjacent to King's Cross, you also have Potts Point. Potts Point is a little bit more refined, a little bit more elegant, a little bit more boutique than what you get at King's Cross. Here, you're going to find some beautiful restaurants and some amazing cafes to stop at. Specifically, there's a French cafe in between the border of King's Cross and Potts Point that we really love. Additionally, you're going to be right on the water. You're still decently walking distance from the city. Buses and transportation doesn't come here as often, so a lot of the time you will still find yourself walking through or into King's Cross to get anywhere in the city. But if you're looking for a more laid back, quiet area in the city, it is pretty close to Sydney downtown proper. Potts Point might be the area for you. Another area that I would recommend staying is Bondi, specifically Bondi Junction. The reason for this is Bondi Beach is a little bit it is far from Bondi Junction. You're going to have to take a bus. Bondi Beach doesn't have a train station. Bondi Junction does. If you stay in Bondi Junction, you can get into the city fairly quickly. If you stay in Bondi Beach, you're going to need to take a 40-minute bus into the city or take a bus to the trains to get into the city. Whereas Bondi Junction has a train station that will take you directly into the city. Don't get me wrong, Bondi Beach is definitely worth visiting. In fact, it's one of the main things you should be coming to Sydney to do. But unless you plan to spend your whole week or days or however long you have in Sydney at the beach, it is nice to be close to a train station so you can get around. There are no train stations going further than Bondi Junction, so if you're looking at Coogee Beach or any of these other beach locations, there generally aren't trains that go out to them. They are beautiful, they are amazing, and if you go away from Bondi Beach, you can find some cheaper places to stay. Do note that it will be harder to get into the city. Farther you get from Bondi Junction, the harder it's going to be. But if you're just here in Sydney to see the beaches or do some beautiful walks, maybe that is a-okay with you. If you're looking for a beach that has a little bit more of a laid back vibe compared to Bondi, Coogee Beach would be one to look into. You're going to have to take a bus into the city. It's a little bit less connected to everything, but it still has all the amenities that you'd expect for Bondi to have, and you're going to be paying a little bit less as far as hotels and stays go. Thing here is there's a beautiful cliff walk you can take from Coogee to Bondi. It's going to take you an hour or two, but it is a beautiful walk. You're still connected to so many beautiful beaches. You're just going to be paying a little bit more less and living a little bit more like a local. That said, these are the main locations that I would recommend you stay in Sydney. I'm going to list off a few other locations for people that are interested, however. You have Manly, which is a chiller city connected to Sydney. If you're staying out here, you're going to be needing to take a ferry everywhere you go. You could take a bus, but the ferry is going to be the optimal route. Manly is its own little beach town. Think of it as a vacation for Sydney siders. Whether or not you want to stay here is up to you, but if you do stay here, know you will be disconnected from a lot of the rest of the city. And if you really want to be disconnected from a lot of the rest of the city, you can stay up in the Blue Mountains. The Blue Mountains are beautiful. There's amazing things to see out here and some of the most beautiful trails that you can find in Australia. Hiking through mist-filled canyons and over mountains and seeing beautiful mountain vistas, this is where you want to stay if you want to fall in love with the nature side of Sydney. It is beautiful up here. It is stunning up here. It has some of the best hiking trails I've ever been on in my life. That said, though, it is far from the city. It's hard to get into the city. You will need a car, and it's a little bit sleepier. You close a little bit earlier, and you don't have as many options when it comes to restaurants or places to eat. You can still get a killer cup of coffee, but you won't have the same sort of foodie experience that you would in the city. It is an amazing place to stay, and I would recommend it if you're doing a longer stay in Sydney. It's great for a couple days, especially if you like hiking. And if hiking isn't your thing, but you do want to experience a little bit more of the countryside, there's also Hunter Valley. Putting this in a Sydney places to stay video is a bit of a stretch, but I do want to mention it. Hunter Valley is the wine region of Sydney. They produce some beautiful vintages, and there are some really amazing wineries out here. If you like Australian wine or want to learn about Australian wine, this is a great place to do a long weekend or just a day or two. And speaking of drinking, if that's one of the reasons that you're coming to
Yeah,
Sydney,
exato.
it'd be doing you a great disservice to not mention these two areas. The first one being Newtown. Newtown is more of a hipster area of Sydney. It has a long street that you can walk down and find bars and restaurants around every corner. It really is a vibrant, amazing place in the city. In Sydney, most of the nightlife has moved out to the suburbs, and Newtown is probably one of the biggest suburbs that nightlife has moved to. In Sydney, Newtown would be considered the inner west, and it still is a train station, so getting into the city isn't going to be that hard. It will take 20 to 30 minutes, however. And if that is too long for you, there's one other area that you might want to look at, and that would be Surrey Hills. This would be the LGBTQ area of Sydney. It has a lot of bars and restaurants here. It's a little bit more geared towards people looking to party and have some fun, not towards people that have kids, but you can take your kids through here without any worry. A beautiful area of the city. It has some amazing, vibrant areas, and it has a little bit more of that sort of hip, turn of the century, old school feel to it. A lot of the buildings are from the 1900s and do have an older feel to them, or older by Sydney standards. You're also very close to Hyde Park, depending on where you're staying in Surrey Hills, so walking into the city shouldn't be that difficult. And if you're looking for an area that's similar to Surrey Hills, you can always try Paddington. Paddington is located directly next to Surrey Hills. It is a little bit less of the LGBTQ feel, a little bit more of that hipster feeling. You still have all the old school Sydney architecture and buildings here. You're going to have a lot of boutique places. You're going to have a lot of really beautiful Airbnbs and some cool boutique hotels. It's a great place to stay if you're looking to stay in between the beaches and the city and have a little bit more of a laid back atmosphere while you're at it. It's going to be a little bit laid back. It's going to be a little bit harder to get to these places, but it still is a great place to stay because it has a really good proximity to everything. And you're going to have some nice, quiet nights and some more chilled mornings to wake up to. As far as other areas of the city to stay in, there are tons, but they're going to appeal to a much smaller audience, in my opinion. North Sydney has beautiful views of the city, Luna Park, and some really cool paths that you can take. However, it is a bit more of a financial district. It gets slower at night, and a lot of tourists would find themselves very bored there or just wishing that they stayed across the bridge. And you've got the Central Coast, which has some amazing places that you can stay right on the water, and if you go down south, you can be in the Shire, which is its own little amazing area of Sydney. There are so many locations that are amazing and worth staying in Sydney. I just wanted to list a few of them off that are very popular and really worth looking into. If you liked the video and want to learn more about Sydney, I've got a ton of videos on Sydney and Australia in general. I'm an expat who's lived here for 6 years, so I do know a few things, and I know what might appeal to foreigners. And if you're looking for links to some of the places that were mentioned, check the description. I'm going to try and post links to some great hotel deals and everything like that down below. And if you have any questions or anything like that, feel free to ask. I'm going to try my best to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you do come to Sydney, I hope you have an amazing time.